One story, one decision. Everything changed.
I was 4 months pregnant, standing at the top of the stairs in my own house with a laundry basket on my hip, when I heard my husband tell his brother that our baby was a mistake he was going to fix. He did not say it that plainly. People rarely say the worst things plainly. What he said, in the low voice men use when they think the women in their lives are too far away to hear, was, "The baby was never part of the plan, Marcus. I'm handling it. She just doesn't know yet." And his brother laughed, a short ugly laugh, and said something I could not make out, and I stood at the top of those stairs with my hand on my stomach and I did not make a sound, because months before that night I had already learned that silence was the only thing in that house that still belonged to me. I want to tell you the whole thing, in order, because the sentence at the top of the stairs was not where it started. It was where I finally understood something I had been collecting evidence of for almost half a year without letting myself say why. By the time I heard him say the baby was not part of the plan, I had already been recording every room in our house for 3 months. I am going to explain how a woman ends up putting cameras in her own home, pointed at her own husband, because I did not become that person overnight, and I need you to understand that I tried every other thing first. My name is Claire. I am 34 years old, and at the time all of this happened I lived in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood with a homeowners association and a community pool and a lot of people who smile at you in the Harris Teeter parking lot and know nothing about what happens behind each other's front doors. I worked from home as a medical billing specialist, which matters later, because it meant I was in that house all day, alone, and I noticed things, and I had the kind of mind that keeps records, because keeping records was literally my job. My husband's name is Greg. We married in 2019, when I was 29 and he was 33. He sold commercial insurance, did well at it, drove a leased Audi he washed every Sunday, and when I met him he was the most attentive man I had ever dated. He remembered the name of my childhood dog. He texted good morning before I woke up. My mother, who has never liked anyone I dated, liked Greg, and that felt like proof of something. I know now that the attentiveness was a kind of study, that he was learning me the way you learn a system you intend to operate, but I did not know it then, and I am not going to pretend I saw it coming, because I did not. For the first 2 years, the marriage was the marriage I thought I had signed up for. Then it changed, slowly, in the way these things change, so gradually that naming any single moment makes you feel like you are overreacting. The good morning text stopped. The attentiveness turned into a kind of management. Greg started keeping a closer eye on money, our money, the money I also earned, and asking me to account for ordinary purchases in a tone that suggested I was a department running over budget. He moved our accounts around in 2022, consolidated things, set up a new joint account that the statements for came to his email instead of the mail, and told me it was for the taxes, and I believed him because believing him was easier than the alternative. The first time I understood that something was actually wrong, instead of just sad, was in the spring of 2023. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother, who died in 2021. $41,000, which she left specifically to me, in my name, and which I had kept in a separate account precisely because some quiet part of me, a part one was not listening to yet, wanted one thing in my life that was only mine. In the spring of 2023, Greg started talking about that money. Not asking for it. Talking around it. How it was just sitting there. How it didn't make sense for a married couple to keep money separate. How a real partnership meant combining everything. He was patient about it, the way a man is patient when he is certain he will win, and over a few months the conversation went from suggestion to expectation to a kind of low steady pressure that was in the room every time we talked about anything financial. I did something then that I am proud of, looking back, because it was the first time the part of me that kept records started keeping records on my own marriage. I did not give him the money. I told him I wanted to think about it, and I kept telling him that, and I started, without quite admitting to myself why, to pay closer attention. I wrote things down. Dates. What he said. The way the pressure ramped up after he had been on the phone with his brother Marcus, who was divorced, bitter about it, and who had a way of leaving Greg harder and colder than he found him. I need to tell you about the brother, Marcus, because Marcus is the second voice on most of the recordings and the closest thing this story has to a second villain. Marcus is 2 years older than Greg, divorced in 2021 from a woman named Steph who, according to Marcus, took him for everything, which I later learned meant she got half of what was legally half hers after he had hidden accounts from her for years and the court found out. Marcus came out of that divorce with a worldview, and the worldview was that marriage is a trap that women spring on men, that everything is a transaction, and that the smart move is to always be 3 steps ahead of your own wife. He spent a lot of time at our house in 2022 and 2023, more than I wanted, and he and Greg would sit in the den with the door half closed and talk, and I would catch pieces of it, and the pieces were always about money, leverage, and who had the upper hand in someone's relationship. By the summer of 2023, Greg had started doing things that I could not explain with any innocent story, no matter how much I wanted to. He took my name off the new joint account, the one he had set up for the taxes, and when I noticed and asked, he said it was a bank error and he would fix it, and he never did. He started questioning where I was during the day, which was absurd, because I worked from home and was almost always exactly where he left me. He installed a new lock on the door of his home office and gave me a reason that did not hold up, something about client documents and confidentiality, in a house where I had never once gone through his things. I want to be honest about the fear, because the fear is the part people who have not lived it do not understand. I was not afraid Greg would hit me. He never raised a hand, never even raised his voice in a way the neighbors would have heard. What I was afraid of was quieter and harder to point at. I was afraid that I was slowly being moved, like furniture, into a position where I would have no money of my own, no access to our accounts, no record of anything, and that one day I would wake up and discover that every door I might have walked out of had been locked while I was being reasonable. I was afraid of waking up with nothing and no way to prove I had ever had anything. That fear turned out to be exactly correct, and the only reason it did not happen is the cameras. Here is how the cameras started, and I want to walk through it carefully, because it is the decision everything else hangs on. In August of 2023, I found a folder. Not hidden well, which tells you how little Greg thought of my attention, in a drawer in the kitchen under the takeout menus. It was a printout, several pages, from a legal website, about divorce in North Carolina. Specifically about separation, about the 1-year separation requirement our state has, about asset division, about what counts as separate property and what counts as marital property, and someone, Greg, had highlighted the sections about separate property and written a note in the margin in his handwriting. The note said, "Inheritance equals separate and less commingled. Get her to combine it. Get her to combine it." He had researched how to legally take my grandmother's money, and the answer he found was to talk me into mixing it into our accounts so it would stop being mine, and he had written the strategy down like a man planning a sales close. I stood in my kitchen holding that folder, and I understood that the pressure about the inheritance was a plan, a documented plan, and that my husband was not a confused or struggling partner. He was running a strategy on me. And the part of me that keeps records went very cold and very calm, and I made a decision standing there that I did not fully understand yet. I put the folder back exactly where I found it, take out menus on top, angled the way they had been angled. And I drove to a store the next day and I started buying cameras. I did not buy spy equipment, and I want to be clear about that, because it matters for what the recordings were able to do later. I bought ordinary consumer security cameras, the kind half the houses on my street already had, the kind you buy at a big box store and tell your neighbors about because of package theft. Small white cameras, a brand the clerk recommended, that recorded to a card and to an app on my phone. I bought 6 of them over 3 weeks, paying cash for some and using my own separate account for others, the account from my grandmother that Greg wanted so badly, which felt like the first useful thing that money had ever done. I put them where a person puts home security cameras, and that is the thing that made them invisible. One by the front door, one over the back door, one in the kitchen, one in the den where Greg and Marcus had their conversations, one in the hallway outside Greg's locked office, and one in the garage. To anyone who looked, they were exactly what they appeared to be, a nervous woman in a nice neighborhood protecting her home. Greg even commented on the first one, the front door camera, and said it was a good idea with all the package theft lately, and I agreed with him, and I did not mention the other 5. North Carolina, I had already looked up by then, is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, which means that as long as one person in a conversation consents to it being recorded, it is legal, and I was a party to my own household, in my own home, and I had consented. I checked that before I bought a single camera. The record's mine again. I was not going to build something that could not be used. For the first few weeks, the cameras gave me ordinary life, and ordinary life was its own kind of education. I would sit at my desk during the workday with the app open in a corner of my screen, and I would watch my own house the way you watch a documentary about strangers, and I started to see my marriage from the outside. I saw how Greg's whole body changed when I left a room, the way the warmth switched off like it ran on a meter. I saw him go through the mail and set aside anything addressed to me, to be handed over later or not at all. I saw him on the phone in the den, and even without audio at first, because I had not turned on the microphones yet, I could read the body language of a man who was managing something. Then I turned on the audio, and that is when the house started telling me the truth. The den camera caught the conversations with Marcus, and the conversations with Marcus were where Greg said the things he would never say to my face. I am going to tell you about several of these recordings, across several months, because the pattern is the thing, and the pattern is what protected me. The first one that made me sit very still was from early September of 2023. Greg and Marcus in the den, a football game on low, and Marcus asking how the inheritance thing was going. And Greg said, and I have it word for word because I transcribed all of these later, slow. She keeps saying she'll think about it. I'm going to stop pushing for a while, let it go quiet, then bring it up like it's her idea. You can't force Claire, you have to walk her into it. You have to walk her into it. My husband described managing me the way you describe hurting an animal that spooks easily. I did not confront him. I want you to understand how hard that was, because every cell in my body wanted to walk downstairs and throw the folder and the recording in his face. What stopped me was the same cold, clear thing that had stopped me from giving him the money. One recording of a man being a manipulative husband is sad, and it is not enough. It would have gotten me a fight, a denial, an apology, and a more careful Greg who moved his planning somewhere my cameras could not see. I needed the whole pattern. I needed it documented across enough time that no one could call it a bad night taken out of context. So I did the hardest thing, which was to keep living in that house, smiling at that man across the dinner table, while the cameras gathered what I could not yet afford to act on. And then, in October of 2023, I found out I was pregnant, and everything I had been calmly documenting turned into something I could not be calm about. The pregnancy was not planned, and I will be honest about that, because it is part of why what Greg said later cut the way it did. We had talked about children in the abstract, the way couples do, someday, when things are settled, and the pregnancy arrived ahead of that someday. I was happy. I was scared in the ordinary way, and underneath the ordinary fear was a different fear, because I was carrying a child with a man I had cameras pointed at, and I did not know yet what that meant for any of us. I told Greg on a Tuesday night in October. I had hoped, the way you hope against your own evidence, that the news might reset something in him, might bring back the man from 2019. I watched his face when I told him, and I saw the calculation happen. It was the same look I had watched on the camera feed 100 times, the meter switching, except this time it was pointed at me in person, in real time, over the news that we were going to have a baby. He said the right words. He hugged me. He said he was happy. And the next morning, after he left for work, I opened the app and I watched the recording from the den from late the night before, after I had gone to bed, and I watched my husband call his brother and say, "She's pregnant." No, I know. I know. This complicates the timeline. This complicates the timeline. That is what our child was to him on the first night he knew about it. A complication in a schedule. Over the next 4 months, while I grew a person, my husband adjusted his plan, and the cameras caught the adjustment. I am going to be careful here, because this is the part of the story that is genuinely dark, and I am not going to dramatize it beyond what the recordings actually contained, because the recordings were bad enough without help. He stopped pushing about the inheritance the way he had told Marcus he would, and instead he started building a different story, a story about me. I started hearing it in pieces on the den camera, Greg on the phone with Marcus, and sometimes with someone else I did not recognize at first and later learned was a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer yet, a consultation. The story Greg was building was that I was unstable. That the pregnancy hormones were making me erratic. That he was worried about her, that he was documenting things, that he was concerned about my mental state and whether I was fit. He was constructing, slowly and deliberately, a narrative in which he was the steady, concerned husband and I was the unstable pregnant wife who could not be trusted with money or, the implication grew over the weeks, with a child. I understood what he was doing, because I do the same kind of work, in a way. I build cases for insurance billing. I know what it looks like when someone assembles a record designed to support a conclusion they have already reached. Greg was building a file on me, the way he had researched the inheritance, and the conclusion the file was being built to support was that Claire was the problem. Claire was unwell, and whatever Greg did next, leaving me, taking the accounts, fighting for control of everything including the baby, would look like the reasonable act of a worried man. The cruelest recording from those months, the one I almost could not transcribe, was from December. Greg and Marcus in the den, and Marcus asked, in that flat, ugly way of his, whether Greg was sure about keeping it, meaning the baby, meaning my child, and Greg was quiet for a moment and then he said, I'm not raising someone else's leverage. Either she signs things the right way or I'm out. And if I'm out, I'm not paying 18 years for a kid I didn't plan because she wanted to lock me in. He thought I had gotten pregnant on purpose to trap him. He had decided, with no evidence, because evidence was never how Greg decided things about me, that our baby was a strategy one had run on him, the same way he ran strategies on me. Because a man who sees the whole world as leverage cannot imagine that anyone else is simply living their life. That brings me back to the top of the stairs, in the middle of January 2024, 4 months pregnant, laundry basket on my hip. The whisper at the top of the stairs was not on the cameras, because I was on the stairs and not at my desk, and the stairs were one of the few places I had not put a camera. I heard it with my own ears, live, in real time, which somehow made it worse than any of the recordings. The baby was never part of the plan, Marcus. I'm handling it. She just doesn't know yet. And Marcus laughing. I want to tell you exactly what I did in the 90 seconds after I heard that, because it is the moment I stopped being a woman gathering evidence and became a woman with a plan. I did not gasp. I did not drop the laundry basket. I turned around, quietly, on the stairs, and I carried the laundry back up to the bedroom, and I set it down, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I put both hands flat on my stomach, and I made myself breathe until I was certain my voice would be level. Then I went back downstairs and I walked into the den where the two of them were sitting, and I asked if anyone wanted coffee, in the ordinary voice of an ordinary pregnant wife, and Greg said no thanks and smiled at me, the meter switching on. And Marcus would not meet my eyes, and I made myself a decaf and I went back upstairs, and that night, after Greg was asleep, I started moving. The first thing I did was protect the recordings, because everything depended on them surviving. I had 3 months of footage on the camera cards and in the app, and I did not trust either to be the only copy, and I especially did not trust them to survive if Greg ever suspected. So over the next 2 days, while he was at work, I downloaded everything. I copied all of it to an external drive. I copied the most important recordings, the inheritance plan, the timeline call, the December conversation, the lawyer consultation, to 2 separate cloud accounts under an email address Greg did not know I had, created on my work laptop. And I put the external drive not in the house, but in a safe deposit box at a credit union across town that I opened with my grandmother's money, the separate account, the one Greg had spent a year trying to take. For copies, in places he could not reach. The records mined, doing the most important filing of my life. The second thing I did was find a lawyer, and not the kind of consultation Greg had been having. I found a family law attorney in Raleigh named Patricia Vance, who had a reputation, I had quietly researched, for representing women in exactly the situation I was in, financial control and a controlling husband building a false narrative. I paid her retainer from my grandmother's account. I sat in her office, 20 weeks pregnant, and I put my phone on her desk and I played her 4 recordings, and Patricia Vance, who I am certain has heard a great deal in her career, listened to all 4 without a word. And at the end she took off her reading glasses and she said, "Claire, I want you to understand something. Most women come to me with a feeling and a few text messages. You came to me with a documented pattern. Do you understand how rare that is, and how much it changes what we can do?" And I said I had a feeling it might matter, and she said it was going to matter a great deal. Patricia explained the landscape to me, plainly, the way I needed. She told me that the recordings were legal, North Carolina being a one-party consent state and me being a party in my own home. She told me that the inheritance was my separate property and that the folder, the highlighted printout in Greg's own handwriting laying out a plan to commingle it, was almost the most useful single piece of evidence I had, because it showed intent. She told me that Greg's effort to build a narrative about my mental instability was a tactic she had seen many times, and that the recordings, in which he openly described constructing that narrative as a strategy, turned his own weapon around completely. Because a man on tape planning to portray his wife as unstable is a man who has handed the court his motive. And she told me the thing that mattered most to me, that a father plotting on tape about not wanting to pay for a child he was calling leverage was not a man any judge was going to hand custody or sympathy to. Then Patricia asked me the question that the whole plan turned on. She asked me what I wanted. Not what I wanted to do to Greg. What I wanted for myself and the baby when this was over. I had to think about her question for a few days, because I had spent so long gathering evidence that I had not let myself picture the after. When I went back to Patricia, I told her what I wanted, and it was simpler than revenge. I wanted out, cleanly. I wanted my grandmother's money protected. I wanted a fair division of what Greg and I had actually built together, which I had earned half of with my own salary. I wanted full custody, with whatever supervised arrangement a court thought was right for a father like Greg, because I was not going to be the one to erase him from the child's life. The court could decide what he had earned. And I wanted it done in a way that could not be turned into a story about a hysterical pregnant woman, because Greg had spent months trying to write that story and I refused to hand him the last page. Patricia and I built the plan over the next several weeks, and the plan had an order to it, and the order was everything. She told me not to confront Greg, not to change my behavior in any way he would notice, and above all not to let him know the cameras existed, because the moment he knew, he would lawyer up differently, hide assets faster, and accelerate whatever he was planning. So I went home and I kept being the wife he thought he was managing, and it was the hardest acting I have ever done, smiling at a man across a dinner table while a safe deposit box across town held the recording of him calling our baby leverage. While I performed normalcy, Patricia worked. She had me quietly gather financial documents, every statement I could access, screenshots of the accounts before Greg could move anything, records of my salary going back years, the paperwork on my grandmother's inheritance showing it had always been separate. I photographed the folder in the kitchen drawer, the highlighted divorce printout with his handwriting, in place, with the date visible on my phone, and then I left it exactly where it was, because Patricia said a thing photographed in place is worth more than a thing taken. I made copies of the lease on the Audi, the mortgage, the insurance, everything, because Patricia said the person who walks into the divorce with the complete file controls the pace of it, and she wanted us controlling the pace. There was one more thing I did during those weeks, and it is the thing I am most quietly proud of. I protected my grandmother's $41,000 permanently. Greg had spent a year trying to get me to commingle it, and on Patricia's advice I did the opposite. I moved it into an account structured so that it was unambiguously, permanently separate, documented, dated, with a paper trail showing it had never touched a marital account. The money my husband had built an entire strategy around taking became the money that paid the lawyer who ended him. I think about that more than I should. I also kept the cameras running, because Greg, who had no idea anything had changed, kept talking. In February, 8 weeks before everything came apart, he had a conversation with Marcus that I gave to Patricia and that she said she would have paid to obtain, because in it Greg laid out his actual timeline. He told Marcus he was going to wait until after the baby was born, get me to sign a few things while I was exhausted and overwhelmed with a newborn, and then reassess. He used that word about his own family. Reassess. He said, and the camera caught it clean, once she's got a newborn, she's not going to have the energy to fight about anything. That's the window. He was planning to use the hardest, most depleted weeks of my life as the moment to take everything. He had a window. He told his brother about the window. And the window he described became, instead, the timeline Patricia and I used against him, because we now knew exactly what he was waiting for and we made sure to move before it. We moved in the middle of March of 2024, when I was about 34 weeks pregnant, which Greg never saw coming because his entire plan assumed I would do nothing until after the birth. Patricia had everything ready. The filing, the financial record, the recordings organized and time-stamped, the request for the inheritance to be confirmed as separate property, and a request for temporary orders regarding custody that laid out, in careful legal language backed by Greg's own recorded words, why this particular father needed supervision. I did not stay in the house for the serving. Patricia was firm about that, and she was right. A man who has spent 2 years controlling a house can become unpredictable the moment he realizes he has lost control of it, and I was 8 weeks from my due date, and I was not going to be standing in that den when Greg understood what had happened. So I packed 2 bags while he was at work, the things that mattered, my documents, my grandmother's few pieces of jewelry, the clothes I would need, and I went to stay with my mother and Carrie, and I left the cameras running, every one of them, because I wanted a record of what Greg did when he found out, and because the cameras were mine, in my house, and they were going to work for me right up to the end. Greg was served at the house on a Thursday afternoon. I watched it later, all of it, on the recordings, from my mother's house, with a cup of tea going cold beside me. I watched the process server knock, and Greg answer, and take the envelope, and I watched my husband stand in our front hallway and read the first page, and I watched the meter in him break. He called Marcus within 4 minutes. The den camera caught the whole call, Greg's side of it, and Greg was not calm and managing anymore. He was a man who had just discovered the floor was not where he left it. He kept saying, "How does she have this? How does she have any of this?" Over and over. How does she have this? He still did not know about the cameras. He thought, I think, that I had somehow gotten lucky, stumbled into a few documents. He had no idea that the house itself had been listening to him for 7 months, that the den he felt safest in had a small white camera that he had walked past 1,000 times, that every conversation with Marcus about timelines and windows and leverage was sitting in a safe deposit box across town. He found one of the cameras that night. The kitchen one. I watched him find it, watched his face change as he understood what it was and then, slowly, what it meant, and watched him turn and look at the den, where the other one was, and walk over and find that one too. I had already downloaded everything, so it did not matter, but I will admit that I watched him discover them with a feeling I am not entirely proud of and am not going to pretend I did not have. He stood in the den holding the little white camera in his hand, and he looked directly into it, knowing now that I would see it, and the look on his face was the first honest thing I had seen from him in 2 years. He called me that night, 11 times. I did not answer, because Patricia had told me not to, because every word now went through lawyers, which was its own kind of justice given how many of Greg's words I had that he wished went through no one. He left messages that moved through the stages exactly as Patricia predicted. First the reasonable Greg, the managing voice, telling me we should talk like adults and not let lawyers ruin us. Then, when I did not respond, the Greg who threatened, who said I had no idea what I had started, who said the recordings were illegal and I would regret them, which I had Patricia confirm in writing they were not, given our state. And then, late, the last message, the real Greg, the one from the recordings, who said something cold and quiet that I saved and gave to Patricia, because a man who threatens the mother of his child on a voicemail has handed her one more page for the file. Greg hired a good lawyer. I will give him that. He hired an expensive divorce attorney from a firm with its name on a building downtown, and for about 2 weeks Greg seemed to believe that money and a sharp lawyer would let him do to the divorce what he had done to our marriage, which was to control it. Then his expensive lawyer actually reviewed what Patricia sent over, and something changed, and I know it changed because the tone of everything from Greg's side shifted from fighting to settling almost overnight. I learned later, roughly, what happened in that lawyer's office, because Patricia explained the dynamics to me. Greg's attorney would have sat him down and walked him through what we had. 7 months of recordings, legal in our state, in which Greg, in his own voice, described a documented plan to take his wife's inheritance by manipulating her into commingling it. Recordings in which he described building a false narrative about her mental instability as a deliberate tactic. Recordings in which he called his unborn child leverage and a complication and said he would not pay for a kid he had decided was a trap. A handwritten note, photographed in place, laying out the inheritance scheme in Greg's own hand. A complete financial record that I had captured before he could move a dollar. And a wife who had done all of this calmly, legally, and months in advance, which meant there was no angle of attack, no way to call her unstable, because unstable women do not quietly build airtight cases over 7 months while smiling across the dinner table. Greg's lawyer, I am confident, told him the truth, which is that there was no version of a trial that did not end with those recordings being played in front of a judge, and that a man whose own voice on tape calls his baby leverage does not want a custody hearing, does not want any of it read into a record, and should settle quietly and quickly and be grateful for whatever he could get. Which is what he did. The settlement came together over the spring, while I was having my baby, and I want to tell you that part plainly, because the timing is the part that still makes me shake my head at the man Greg was. My daughter was born in early May of 2024, healthy, 8 pounds 1 ounce, in a hospital in Raleigh, with my mother beside me and not Greg, because by then the temporary orders were in place and Greg's contact was already limited. I named her after my grandmother, the woman whose $41,000 had quietly funded the entire defense of her own great-granddaughter. I think about that too. The money Greg spent 2 years trying to take is the money that protected the baby he called leverage. The final terms, by the standards of these things, were clean, because Greg had no leverage left, all of his leverage having turned out to be recordings of him using the word leverage. My grandmother's inheritance was confirmed as my separate property, untouched, because I had never let him commingle it and the folder proved he had tried. The marital assets, the accounts, the equity in the house, were divided fairly, which after years of him moving money around to disadvantage me felt like its own small justice. He kept his Audi and his half and his name on a building's worth of legal fees. I kept the baby. The custody arrangement gave Greg supervised visitation only, on a schedule a court set after hearing what kind of plans he made on tape, and the supervision was not my choice. It was the considered judgment of people whose job is to weigh exactly this, and I made my peace with it on that basis. I want to back up and tell you about the months I have skipped over, the 7 months I lived in that house knowing what I knew, because people who hear the clean ending do not understand the cost of the middle, and the middle is most of the truth of it. Living with Greg while the cameras ran was the strangest period of my life. I would spend my workday watching the recordings from the day before, hearing my husband describe me as a system to be managed and our child as a complication. And then I would close the laptop and make dinner and ask him about his day and listen to him lie about it. And I would smile, and I would go to bed beside him. I lost weight I should have been gaining. I told my doctor it was nausea, which was partly true and mostly not. I could not tell my mother yet, because my mother cannot keep her face still, and one worried phone call from her at the wrong moment could have tipped Greg off. So I carried it alone, the way you carry something heavy across a long room without setting it down, because setting it down in the wrong place would have broken it. The hardest part was not the cruelty on the recordings. The hardest part was the ordinary moments in between, because Greg was not a monster every minute, and that is what makes a person doubt themselves. He would bring me ginger candies for the nausea. He would put his hand on my stomach and seem, for a moment, like a man who wanted to be a father. And I would feel the doubt creep in, the voice that said maybe I was overreacting, maybe the recordings were just a man venting to his awful brother, maybe I was the one building a false narrative. And then I would open the app and hear him say window and leverage and reassess, and the doubt would burn off, and I would remember that the warmth was the most calculated thing about him. Because a man who can be warm to you while planning your removal is more dangerous than a man who is simply cold. I leaned on two things during those months. The first was the records themselves, because every time the doubt came, the file answered it. The second was the baby. Somewhere in there, the cameras stopped being only about protecting my money and started being about protecting her, the daughter I had not met yet, who her own father was already describing as a problem to be solved. The first time I felt her move, I was sitting at my desk with the app open, and I made a decision that I have not regretted for 1 second since, which is that whatever it cost me, my daughter was never going to grow up being managed by the man I was listening to. The cameras were for her. Most of what I did from that point was for her. I should tell you what happened to Marcus, because people always want to know about the brother. Marcus did not face anything legal, because being a bitter divorced man who gives your brother terrible advice is not a crime. And most of what he said on the recordings was Greg's plan, not his. But the recordings became part of the court record, and court records have a way of being seen, and Marcus's own ex-wife's attorney, in a custody modification Steph filed later for reasons of her own, requested them. I do not know all of what came of that, and I did not chase it, because chasing the people who hurt you is its own way of letting them keep your time. What I know is that the worldview Marcus sold Greg, the one where everyone is leverage and the smart man stays 3 steps ahead, did not protect either of them in the end, because it turned out the person quietly staying 3 steps ahead the whole time was me. Greg has supervised visits with our daughter. He comes on the schedule the court set, to a place the court chose, with a person present whose job is to be present. He holds her, and I am told he is gentle with her, and I hope that is true, and I hope that some part of the man who brought me ginger candies is real and finds its way to her, because she did not choose any of this and she deserves whatever good her father is capable of. I do not hate Greg anymore, which surprised me. Hating him would mean still being managed by him, still letting him set the temperature of my days. And I did that for 2 years and I am finished doing it. What I feel is closer to the feeling you have about a storm that has passed, a clear memory of how dangerous it was and a steadiness in knowing you are no longer standing in it. I sold the house in Raleigh. I could have kept my share and stayed, but I did not want to raise my daughter in the rooms where I had put cameras, in the den where her father called her leverage, in the kitchen where I found the folder under the takeout menus. Some houses hold what happened in them, and that one held too much. I took my half of the equity, and my grandmother's $41,000 that was still whole and still mine, and I bought a smaller place closer to my mother in Cary, a 3-bedroom on a quiet street, with a room I painted for my daughter in the months before she was old enough to have an opinion about the color. I did keep the cameras, the actual hardware, which my mother thought was strange when she helped me move. I keep them in a box in the closet, all 6 of them, and I am not entirely sure why, except that they did for me what no person in my life had been able to do during those months, which was to tell the truth and keep telling it no matter how warm Greg was at dinner. I think I keep them the way you keep the thing that saved your life, not because you want to look at it, but because throwing it away would feel like pretending you were never in the water. My daughter is walking now. She is loud and stubborn and she laughs with her whole body, and she has my grandmother's name and, people tell me, my mother's eyes. She will grow up in a quiet house with a mother who is present and steady and not being managed by anyone, and one day, when she is much older, if she asks, I will tell her some version of this, the version that is right for whatever age she is when she asks. I will tell her that her father and I were not able to stay married, and that I did what I had to do to make sure she and I were safe, and I will leave the worst of it out until she is old enough to decide for herself how much she wants to know. The recordings still exist, in the safe deposit box, for copies, the records mind keeping its files. They are hers someday if she wants them. That will be her choice, the way so little of this was mine until I made it mine. People who hear this story ask me 2 things, and I will answer them both, because they are fair questions and I have had time to think about the answers. The first thing they ask is whether I feel wrong about the cameras, about recording my own husband in our own home without him knowing. I have thought about this a great deal, and my answer is no, and the no is not defensive, it is settled. I did not record him to invade his privacy or to entertain myself with his secrets. I recorded him because I had found a written plan to take what was mine and a pattern of a man building a false story about my mind, and I was pregnant, and I was afraid in a way that turned out to be exactly justified, and I used a legal tool. In my own home, in a state whose laws I checked first, to protect myself and my child from someone who was protected by my silence. A woman who is being quietly dismantled is allowed to keep a record of it. I will believe that until I die. The second thing they ask is whether I wish I had just confronted him at the top of the stairs, screamed, thrown him out, done the thing that would have felt good in the moment. And the honest answer is that the thing that would have felt good in the moment is exactly the thing Greg was counting on. His entire plan, every part of it, depended on me reacting instead of recording, on me being the emotional pregnant wife he could point to, on me giving him a scene he could use. The most powerful thing I ever did was not scream at the top of those stairs. It was carry the laundry back upstairs, sit on the edge of the bed, put my hands on my stomach, and stay quiet for 4 more weeks while the people who protect women like me got everything in order. The silence that had been the only thing in that house that belonged to me turned out to be the thing that saved us. Because the last useful recording is the one I think about most. It is from the night Greg was served, after he found the kitchen camera and then the den camera, when he stood in the den holding the little white camera and looked into it, knowing I would watch. He did not know it was still recording to the card even as he held it. So the last thing on that camera is my husband's face, finally honest, finally without the warm meter running, looking into a lens and understanding that the house had been telling the truth the whole time, and that the quiet woman he thought he was managing had been 3 steps ahead of him for 7 months. He does not say anything. He just looks. And then the recording ends, because he unplugged it, not knowing it had already done its job. The same way he never knew, the whole time, that the baby he called a complication and the wife he called a system were the two people who would walk out of that house whole, and that he was the one who planned his way into having nothing.
If this story resonated with you, you can subscribe for more.